Hello and welcome to today's lesson. I'm your hard-working but indefatigable teacher, Mr. Burton. You will need to watch this video and take notes as you go. You may need to watch certain parts of the video a few times to ensure complete understanding. This is your homework and I will check your notes tomorrow before we get started. I hope you learned something.
Right, hello and welcome to today's lesson, and that is on production possibilities. Production possibilities is a continuation on from our topic of scarcity and scarcity within the economic problem, and production possibilities is one of the fundamental models of microeconomics. Production possibilities is based on the production possibility curve.
A production possibility frontier, PPF, is a range of answers to the question, what is our maximum production capacity? Producing at a maximum level means creating as many jobs and using as many resources as possible. This maximizes employment and minimizes unused resources. It is usually impossible to achieve this ideal state, but it is a good goal. For simple examples, the production possibility frontier is represented by a graph with a vertical x-axis and a horizontal y-axis. Autoland makes cars and trucks. They have a certain amount of workers and resources and want to use as much of both as possible. The x-axis represents car production, and the y-axis shows truck production. If Autoland uses all its resources to make cars, it can produce 100,000. If it uses all its resources to make trucks, it can make 80,000. If it uses half its resources for cars and half for trucks, it can make 50,000 cars and 40,000 trucks. If it uses 3/4 of its resources on cars and 1/4 on trucks, it can make 75,000 cars and 20,000 trucks. Connect all the possible points of maximum production and you get a sloping line that shows the production possibility frontier. Points on the line use the maximum amount of workers and resources. Points above the curved line are unattainable due to limited resources. Points inside the curve do not fully use available resources.
Okay, so the production possibility curve is a curve depicting the maximum output that can be achieved given the assumption that only two goods are being produced in an economy. The maximum amount of output that can be achieved if all of the resources that a country has at its disposal, so the factors of production, land, labour, capital and entrepreneurship, are being used at maximum efficiency. So all inputs are used efficiently, and that's one of the assumptions. So here goes our PPC. All resources are being used efficiently. So in the example here, we've got two goods, and the two assumptions are the maximum amount of wine and or TVs that can be produced given a fixed level of resources and a fixed level of technology. So if new resources are discovered, new technology is being developed or invented, then that will push out the production possibility curve, increasing the amount of these two goods that could be produced. And we know from our topic last time the existence of scarcity and the reality that every economic decision involves trade-offs and costs, and we can illustrate this perfectly with the PPC model. The PPC model is one that we use to demonstrate the fundamental economic concepts we have just learned about in the last topic. So this is an economic problem. Now, our PPC, producing on any point of that line, we are using our resources as efficiently as possible. So any point of production within that line shows that there is an inefficient use of resources. So any of those points here, we have inefficiency. And scarcity is demonstrated because we cannot produce a combination of goods or services outside the PPC. Remember, any point on the line we are using our resources at maximum efficiency. So any point outside the PPC is an unattainable level of production. We may want to produce here, our consumers may demand that we produce here, but the economy cannot. It does not have enough resources, and so we have scarcity. Okay, producing at any point on the PPC, any point on that line there, is production efficiency. It shows maximum resource efficiency, and it also shows the lowest cost per unit of output. So an economy can choose anywhere on this curve to produce, any combination of these two goods or services. So for example, it could be producing 900,000 bottles of wine and 4,000 units of televisions. If an economy would prefer, if the consumers would prefer more TVs and less wine, then less wine can be produced and more TVs can be produced. So the other point there shows that 500,000 bottles of wine are being produced in this economy and 9,000 units of television. Opportunity costs can be easily shown on our PPC model as well. So we have got these two goods that we can be producing in the economy. Remember, that's one of the assumptions, that only two goods are being produced. So if an economy decides to produce 500,000 bottles of wine and 9,000 units of TVs, if they wanted to increase the number of bottles of wine that the economy is being produced, then they're going to have to decrease the number of televisions that they produce. So to produce more wine, the economy is going to have to give up the production of some TVs. And it's not just the production here. We're also talking, production and consumption are two sides of the same coin. So to produce more wine, to consume more wine, then less TVs are going to be produced, and that means less televisions are going to be consumed. And two important concepts, and we'll just touch on them briefly here and go into them in more depth later in the microeconomics course. But allocative efficiency, we have production efficiency, so goods are being produced at maximum efficiency, and they're also being produced at a combination that consumers actually demand. So if this point is allocative efficiency, that means the consumers in this economy would prefer additional wine and fewer TVs. Productive efficiency, you can be producing anywhere on the PPC, but allocative efficiency, you're producing and consuming the combination of goods that the consumers demand. We have two different types of PPC models. We have a straight line, and this depicts constant opportunity cost. This means that to gain a certain amount of one good, the same amount has to be given up for the other. So there's no difference between going from 1,500,000 bottles of wine to 2,500 bottles of wine. The same amount of beer must be given up as going from 6,500 to 800,000 bottles of wine. The same amount of beer is given up each time. Constant opportunity cost. And this occurs because the two goods being produced, the resources being used to produce these two goods, are almost interchangeable. They are interchangeable. So the resources used to produce beer and wine are exactly interchangeable. Now, produce more wine, the same amount of beer is foregone. As the production of one good increases, the opportunity cost in terms of another good stays the same. It's constant, and here's your explanation. When asked to explain why it is a straight line, that the resources are equally suited to the production of both goods. And the converse of this is the concaved or bowed out PPC, the curved shape here, and this depicts increasing opportunity costs. So to gain a certain number of bottles of wine, we have to give up a certain number of televisions. Now, due to the shape of this PPC, the opportunity costs are not constant. We can see that to gain a little bit more wine, a few TVs will have to be forgone. But as the economy is producing near the maximum capacity of wine, to gain additional bottles of wine, then more and more televisions will be forgone. So different resources are used to produce wine and TVs. These resources are not perfectly transferable between production of the two goods. Some resources are more suited to the production of one good and some to the production of another good. So if we're producing a lot of wine, then to produce a little bit more wine, we're going to have to give up a lot more TVs than if we're producing a middling amount of wine. To produce a little bit more wine, we don't have to give up so many televisions. Now, remember the assumptions of the PPC? Resources and technology are fixed. So if these assumptions are lifted, then we can shift the PPC. So if new resources are found or developed, or new technology is invented and developed, then this will enable the economy to produce more of one or both of these goods. Sometimes new resources, new technology will be developed that is particularly suited to just one of these goods, and that will shift out the PPC in the direction of that particular good. So this is an example where only the capacity to produce TVs has increased, so perhaps some new technology, e.g. LCD displays, has been developed, enabling the production of TVs to be expanded, but that technology has nothing to do with the development of wine, so wine stays fixed. We can also show economic growth on our PPC model. On our y-axis we have consumer goods, example wine, and on our x-axis down the bottom we have capital goods, for example robots. So consumer goods are those goods bought and used by consumers rather than by firms for producing other goods. And capital goods are those goods that are used to produce other goods and they're not bought by consumers. So because capital goods are used to make other goods, if the economy decides to make more capital goods, that's going to increase their ability to produce more goods and services in the future. So here we have our first point on the PPC, and this is a combination that shows a lot of consumer goods and few capital goods being produced, which is a choice the economy can make. Now if this occurs, economic growth is going to be relatively less than if more capital goods and less consumer goods have been produced. So if an economy invests heavily in developing capital goods, and the opportunity cost of that, of course, is having less satisfied consumers because fewer consumer goods are being produced. So the country can choose to make more capital goods and less consumer goods. And because capital goods are those goods that are used to produce other goods and services, then in the future this economy's output is going to increase dramatically. And the value of goods and services that an economy produces, if that increases over time, that's called economic growth. So investment in capital goods at the expense of being able to consume all those goods that we want to consume. In the future, we'll be able to have more of both. Economic growth will be much more than if the economy invests in producing just consumer goods, or relatively more consumer goods. So a key point here, a country that invests more in capital goods is going to experience faster economic growth, because in the future those capital goods are going to be able to make more goods and services, because that's what capital goods do.